You don't know what's going to happen. So the best thing to do is to invite people to contribute their ideas, their perspectives on what could happen, and let them come up with ideas for what to try.
Hi, welcome to the Tarun Stevenson Leadership Channel. I'm your host, Tarun Stevenson, and we are all about helping you lead, communicate, and grow to your full potential. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or your favorite podcasting app, don't forget to subscribe and follow so that you can stay up to date with all our latest episodes. All right, here's the latest episode. Let's get into it. Well, hey everybody, it's Tarun here, and I'm here with Andy Smith, who is an NLP facilitator and also an appreciative inquiry facilitator, and we're going to tell you more about that in a moment. He is an author, podcast host, and it's really great to have you on the show, Andy. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Tarun. So I see you're in the Aussie winter at the moment. Is that right?
We are. That's right. Well, look, I live in Brisbane, so winter is probably like a summer in the UK, but it's cold
relative
for us
concept.
here. That's it. And you're located in France at the moment?
We're in rural France.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
It's really hot for us here. So
Sure.
I'll probably get redder and sweatier as the interview goes on. But I was in Oz for 3 months your spring.
Yes.
And we did find that we adapted to the heat by the end of that. So I can quite see why you've got like a leather jacket on.
Yeah, indeed. And which part of Oz were you in?
We started in Sydney and we kind of went up over the top. So we went to Gold Coast, Brisbane, Cairns, far north Queensland, which is lovely.
Yeah.
Broome and Perth.
Oh wow, you got to see the whole lot of it. Yeah, that's fantastic. And it gets really hot up the top there, so especially in summer. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Well, it's great to have you, Andy. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know that you've had a shift in the focus of your training and facilitating work. So just introduce yourself to the audience and so we can get to know you.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I'm just doing a bit of maths in my head now, about 30 years ago now. Yeah. I was working in IT, but I wasn't ever really good at it, and I was getting really, really stressed. Yeah. And I saw an ad in a reputable newspaper which said, become a stress auditor and earn £300 to £600 a week for 10 to 20 hours work. That was, a reasonable amount of money back in those days. And I thought, well, I'm really stressed. I can identify with that. I'm sure I could be better at that than what I'm doing. So I checked it out, and it turned out to be a hypnotherapy course. In fact, the stress auditing was really, they were trying to place the graduates of their hypnotherapy course as like counselors in organizations to help them with their stress. But they got one client with about 5 employees. And on the strength of that, they were advertising nationwide in this newspaper. So it was a little bit of a scam, really. The course was expensive. It wasn't that great. There were better courses around, but because this was pre-internet, I didn't know this. It was much harder to research for things back in those days. Yeah. So I took the course, and although the training wasn't great, I found, wow, actually, when I started seeing clients, actually I can do this. This is good. I'm actually not bad at this. And immediately I started looking for better ways of helping my clients. I read a book called Transformations by Richard Bandler and John Grinder, which was so much more intelligent about the structure of hypnosis than anything that I'd been trained, which was basically like progressive relaxation inductions and or authoritarian type suggestions. And the Transformations was this amazing kind of Ericksonian stuff and so on. And I by the way, if anyone is involved in hypnotherapy or hypnosis in any way, and you've not read Transformations by Bandler and Grinder, I really recommend that you read it. It's a great, great book.
Great.
So I started using bits from that in my practice, and even though I was just getting it from a book, it was worked better than any of the stuff I've been trained in. I met some NLP practitioners. I was impressed by them on a personal level. I trained in NLP in 1995 as a practitioner, master practitioner 96, trainer 97. And I started running NLP practitioner courses in the UK in 2000 and did that for about 10 years, gradually edging into corporate stuff, started getting into coaching, corporate training around emotional intelligence and leadership using really the NLP based stuff.
Right.
And eventually edged more into appreciative inquiry, which perhaps not so many of your listeners might have heard of. It's a method of change within teams and organizations, which works by, rather than traditionally analyzing the problems, looking for the causes of the problems, finding out who's to blame, fixing the causes and so on, which is great. And that will work with simple problems, and it'll bring you back to the status quo where things were when before things went wrong. Appreciative inquiry takes a different approach. It looks at what's already working in any human system, and this includes individuals, actually. This includes your own life. Even no matter how poor the performance is, no matter how bad things seem, there will be some things that are working. And if you identify what those are, even if they're very much the exception rather than the rule, if you identify what's working, if you identify the conditions which allowed those good things to happen, and you do more of them and you put those conditions more in place, then you're going to get an improvement in your results.
Right.
So it's just like it's a format or a framework for allowing people at all levels in the organization, all different roles in the team, to come together and have a structured conversation about where are we now and where do we want to be and how can things be better, without it descending into like a whinge fest, which so I know you've got a big thing in Australia about not whinging and stuff, but certainly in UK culture, where I'm from, home of the whinging palm, it could very easily descend into that. But using the appreciative inquiry format, it doesn't.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I want to dig deeper into the appreciative inquiry format that you've talked about, because that, like you say, that's probably a new idea for many of our listeners. It's not something that's say as commonly talked about as NLP and hypnotherapy. From the little understanding that I have of NLP and hypnotherapy, and really personal development, by and large, we tend to focus on helping people overcome their weaknesses or overcome habitual behavior that has become self-destructive or self-limiting. And so what you're describing here with appreciative inquiry is really flipping the table and focusing on what people, individuals or teams and organizations are actually good at presently, identifying your strengths and then finding ways that you can build those strengths to lift other areas of your work and your life. Is that about right?
That's fair. Yeah, that's about right.
All right, fantastic. So what made you make that shift? Because obviously you spent a lot of time in the NLP camp, and you still do work for NLP facilitating. What made you shift your focus from, say, working with people in overcoming their weaknesses to really having an emphasis on appreciative inquiry as the preferred format?
Yeah, I think, one thing was I moved from Manchester to France 9 years ago, to rural France. So we're in our converted barn here in the middle of rural France right now. Yeah, it is. So I'm like hundreds of miles away from my client base because, my French isn't good enough to see clients in French. So that's one thing. Now, of course, with Skype and Zoom and so on, it would be possible to do that. But back then it wasn't really so easy. So also I was doing more and more corporate stuff. and corporate stuff in the area of really emotional intelligence and leadership. So I was doing training really back then. About 15 years ago, I went to an emotional intelligence conference in Orlando, Florida. And at the bookstall there, I picked up a little book called The Thin Book of Appreciative Inquiry, which was in that sort of selection of books generally relevant to emotional intelligence. And I kind of heard of it, but I thought, okay, this looks intriguing. I'll buy this little book. And it really is small, you know, it's like 50 or 60 pages, but it summed up the whole appreciative inquiry approach in very relatable language. And I thought, actually, I wonder if this is really like the holy grail for helping teams to solve problems in an emotionally intelligent way and relate to each other in an emotionally intelligent way. Then some students of mine who'd done my NLP practitioner training, who were consultants, they liked each other enough from the course that they got together and they formed a consulting company, and they hired a leading appreciative inquiry practitioner in the UK to come in and do like 3 days to train them in appreciative inquiry. They wanted to split the cost a bit more, so they asked me if I was interested, and actually I am. So I went along to this training, and I could see the potential of it from videos that the trainers showed of huge company-wide events where they were using appreciative inquiry. And I kind of got the theory of it, but what I didn't get was, how could I actually use this in practice? When people say, I can't really see myself doing this, what they literally mean is they can't form a mental image of themselves doing that thing.
Sure.
And I couldn't in that case. But eventually, this consultancy made up of my former students invited me to come and help them with a large-scale appreciative inquiry event they were running with like 100 people in I think it was a housing association. And they invited me to come in and be a table facilitator, which is you've got tables of like 8 or 10 people, and each table, to make sure that the conversation stays on a positive track, you've got somebody on each table who knows a bit about appreciative inquiry, who is just making sure that they stay positive, they're sticking to the question format, they don't go off on tangents, especially negative ones. So it's pretty easy job actually. So I came in, I sat at this table, and I could feel the whole atmosphere in this room of 100 people change as soon as the first questions were asked. See, what you do in appreciative inquiry is you get people to, you've got a topic called the affirmative topic, which is really, it's a statement of the problem, but it's a statement of what you want instead of the problem. So you flip the problem on its head. What do we want instead of the problem? So instead of, like, let's say your team meetings are universally agreed to be time wasting, go on way too long, don't really achieve anything. Everyone hates them, they're bored. I think most people working in corporates may have been in that situation one time or another. So rather than looking at it in the spirit of why are our team meetings so rubbish, you would be asking instead something like, a good way to do it is to start, how can we, or how do we? And then you put what you want instead of the problem as the second half of that question. So rather than why are our team meetings so awful, it would be, how do we make the best use of our meeting time, or how do we make our meetings effective, or something like that. So you're focusing not on what you don't want, but on what you do want. And you're asking, how can we do this, which presupposes that there are ways of doing it to be found. So you've got your topic, right? And then you would build appreciative interview questions around that. And your first question is, tell me about a time when something went really well in relation to this topic. So it might be, tell me about a time when you experienced a really good meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're after here is, it's not like bullet points or logical analysis. It's a story. We're asking the other person to tell us a story. And the way that you're doing a good appreciative interview is when you see the person telling the story, starting to relive the experience, starting to lose themselves in that story, starting to really reassociate into that and feel the same emotions that they were feeling then. What this does, the other thing is that you'll know you're doing a really good interview if when you as the interviewer start to feel some of those same emotions, because you're in rapport with the interviewee, and through like emotional contagion, you're starting to feel some of those same emotions as well. So we're getting people, staff members, to interview each other around that topic and hear each other's stories. So this changes the emotional state of the person being interviewed, because they're going back to this time when they had a success. It could be, morale is really low. They've just had a really damaging quarter or something, and everyone's feeling pretty terrible about work. Asking them these questions about, tell us about this good experience you had, or this thing you're proud of, or this thing you've achieved. It reminds them that they're not as bad as they thought they were, and actually they do have some strengths. So this in itself could be an interesting kind of addition to anyone's coaching toolkit, for example. So, right, next question.
I'm going to pause you there, Andy. I just want to unpack that a little bit, because I think what you're saying is really valuable for leaders here. Is very often I see this in my coaching when I work with, say, young leaders or inexperienced leaders. The approach is, if they are outcome oriented, very often the approach is, how do I fix the problems? How do I identify the problems in the team? How do I identify the people that are problematic in the team? And then the conversations tend to revolve around, hey, what you're doing here is not good enough, or we need to fix this. What you're saying is that if you want to get results which help to build teams and to build the morale of teams and build their engagement with change, what we want to do is we want to ask teams what can be better and get them to envisage a time that it actually was better. So you're actually helping them to picture what could be, rather than focusing on what they're failing at. And I think that that's a really valuable lesson for leaders to focus in on, because I know in the area that I work in with behavior management, one of the things that I talk to my clients about is focus. If you're trying to shift the behavior of the people that you're working with, you have to zero in on what they do well, catch them doing the right thing, praise them doing the right thing. And what that will do is it will invoke a repetition of that behavior, rather than focusing on their failures. Is that so? That's where you're really coming from there, isn't it?
Yeah, so you're using a bit of behavioral reinforcement there. So rather than just when they do things wrong and getting a slap on the wrist or getting told off, and the good stuff just being taken as read and ignored, essentially. Anytime they do something good and it's praised or reinforced, then that's going to encourage more of that behavior. Absolutely. We're on the same page here.
Great. So let me press you on that a little bit. What do you say to somebody that perhaps you ask them that question of, when was a time that you experienced that it was good, or, it was ideal, and you get the responses that it's never been good, or, I've never seen that person behave in a way that could remotely be considered good or having potential. What do you say to those kinds of responses? Perhaps the cynic in the group that is a little bit resistant to the idea of change.
Right. So are we talking about from the point of view where we're asking the leader about the performance of somebody in their team, or about something that's happened in their own life that they've been part of?
Well, let's go either way. I think, I mean, the question
Okay.
can, is whether it's a leader working with a team member or whether it's a team member dealing with a leader or somebody dealing with their own
Yeah.
personal struggle. There are people that will approach it from the cynical perspective
Mm.
and say, well, there's nothing good. I can't see the
Yeah.
good in this. I can't see the potential in
Yeah.
this. How do you speak to people like that?
Okay. Well, there's two things really. One is when we're doing the appreciative interviews, we tend to ask them about their own experiences.
Okay.
So rather than they're judging somebody else, it's like, what have you been part of? That, what have you done or what have you even witnessed, which is good, which is harder for them to say everything is terrible, but not impossible, of course. The other thing is I would take if I was working like one-to-one with a client, you can use other approaches to kind of dig for the gold that is somewhere there in their experience. So I would step into maybe something borrowed from solution-focused practice, which is scaling.
Okay.
So you could ask them, okay, so on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is the worst it's ever been, 10 is how it's going to be when you've sorted this problem out completely, where are things now, roughly? And if they say anything other than 0, then they're already acknowledging, even if they haven't realized it, that there's something that is going okay in there, at least some of the time.
Okay.
So if they say anything other than 0, if they say 1, you could say, well, okay, so you're at 1 now. How do you get up from 0 to 1? And they'll start eventually telling you the stuff you want to hear, which is things they've been doing which have actually worked or made things better. You may have to ask that question several different ways.
Sure.
You could say, well, so usually, sometimes things are worse than others. So when is it not quite as bad? You could say that. So you're kind of meeting them where they are at thinking everything is bad, but you're not coming across as somebody who's looking at the world through rose-colored spectacles and saying, everything's wonderful, let's ignore those problems. No, I get that things are bad. When are they not quite as bad? Or you could say, okay, so you say they're at 1. How do you stop it from getting even worse? Which again, they're going to be telling you things which actually work for them and tend to make things better.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. So meet them where they are. Don't deny their experience.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Great. And so you were going to go into question 2 and I cut you off. I apologize.
No. Well, I could rattle on about this all day. So please stop me at any point if you want more like background or detail on any of this. So
great.
Yeah. So they've gone into the story. They've kind of relived it, ideally. Which means they've got access to a much kind of richer recollection of it than they would have done if you just asked them, okay, what works or something. They're associated into it. They can remember what it feels like. They're probably remembering more details about who was there and so on. So the next thing you could ask them is, what's important to you about this experience? Which brings out their values, right? Or some of their values. Values being what motivate you and also your criteria for what's right, what's wrong. Yeah. It's useful to know that, if you could do this if you're leading a team. It's pretty useful to you to know what motivates each of your team members.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and also the research, I believe, which says that when people reconnect with their values, they're more resilient they can recover from setbacks more easily and so on. So that's worth doing. The third question is really going to satisfy the kind of hard-headed rationalists who really just want practical things to do to solve this problem. Because you can ask, okay, so what conditions were in place that enabled this good experience to happen? Was it leadership? Was it team spirit? Was it the physical environment? Was it access to information? Was it your IT systems? What was it? So you can start getting the conditions which actually make success possible, because people people aren't good or bad performers in and of themselves. They will perform better in certain contexts which allow them to perform better and which nurture them and so on. And they'll perform worse in other contexts that don't suit them. So it's, if you can improve the context that they're working in, if you can make it easier for them to perform better, then they're going to perform better anyway, without any additional like training or anything. So final question in the appreciative interview would be something like, if you had 3 wishes for yourself or your team or the organization, what would that be? What would they be? So we're encouraging them to think about the future, not in terms of what's practically achievable, because they might think, oh, won't be able to do that, that's impossible, but in an ideal world. And this gives them a bridge to thinking about the future, thinking about their future vision.
Great.
The other thing that I want to say about the appreciative interview is, ideally, you've got people talking to each other from like different roles, perhaps different levels. It might be the big boss interviewing the intern and vice versa, or even more ideally, you'd bring in people from outside the boundaries of, say you want to improve a team's performance. Ideally, you might have representatives of customers or suppliers of that team involved in the interviews as well, because they will have a different perspective on the team. No one person, including the leader, has a monopoly on the whole truth of the organization. Everyone has different truths from the way they see it. And you can't count the number of change initiatives that have failed because the leader has a vision, but they're missing some useful information that people on the front line could have told them about why it's not going to work, but nobody ever asked those people. So the more kind of diverse voices you get contributing to the appreciative inquiry process, you're actually making it more robust and more likely to succeed.
So in using this process, I'm just envisaging it in a leadership context here, where really what you're doing is you're engaging your people in the process of change, rather than just telling them this is where we're going and you have to go with me. You're actually drawing on their strengths and drawing on their perspectives to ensure that the direction you go is a really complete picture, if you like. I remember a number of years ago, a government official, they're called premiers here, when they're elected to lead a state. And this
premier, right? Okay.
So this premier was elected in a landslide election. He was taking over a failing economy in the state, and everybody was looking for change. And he was actually really smart. He introduced enormous changes very quickly. But within the space of 12 months, he went from winning with a 70% landslide to having a lower popularity poll than the opposition. And the number one reason why was, most people said, you haven't consulted anybody on change. And so even though his ideas were, in my opinion, I thought they were brilliant. I thought he was a really sharp thinker. People wanted change. They were ready for change. But because people felt left behind in the process, it completely destroyed his progress. And sadly, he was not able to implement many of the changes that he intended. And so I can envisage that something like this appreciative inquiry process really creates, as the words you use, creates a bridge for people to walk across when you're navigating change. I mean, now with COVID, people are going through such enormous flux and change in the way that they operate. How can you use something like this in leading in a time of uncertainty or leading in a time of change, when people can be sometimes very resistant to what needs to happen?
So here's the thing about times of extreme change like this, where really nobody knows what's going to happen. Clearly there's going to be some changes, but we don't quite know what direction those changes are going to be in. We don't know if some other pandemic of some other horrible virus is going to come out, or we don't know whether there'll be a vaccine or not, and so on. So in these situations of extreme change, uncertainty, the visionary leader is a little bit all at sea, really, because they don't know what's going to happen either.
Right.
You know, in a fairly stable economy and kind of world situation where things are going along pretty much as they were before, you can get a visionary leader with a vision of the future. Yeah, I can definitely make this happen, and I can make this a reality. You know, so I guess Steve Jobs would be the obvious example of that. But in this situation, nobody knows what's going to happen. So it doesn't matter how smart you are. There's too many different variables going on. So there's no best practice for problem solving in these situations. You can't break it down into smaller parts. You can't analyze the problem because there's just too much going on. There's too many new things. There's people doing crazy stuff as well. You can't even predict how people are going to react, as we've seen. So in that case, the best style of leadership to go for is what there's a leading management thinker in Canada called Dr. Jervis Bush. He's sort of come out of the appreciative inquiry movement, but he's plugged into all sorts of other things as well. And he's got this idea of what he calls generative leadership, which is you don't know what's going to happen. So the best thing to do is to invite people to contribute their ideas, their perspectives on what could happen, and let them come up with ideas for what to try, and try those things knowing that some of them are going to fail. Okay, so there's not a big grand plan. It's a kind of evolution of small changes, one step at a time. Some of these things are going to fail. Some of them are going to succeed outrageously. And we drop the ones that fail and we keep the ideas that are working and go around another cycle and build on those. And to do that, you need some kind of format for allowing people to have that dialogue and generate those ideas. And appreciative inquiry is one very good way of doing that. It's the one that I know about. Great. There are other ones like, open space and stuff, but in my experience, appreciative inquiry is is a workable format and a fairly simple format that people can use. So the leader almost becomes a facilitator. So they're not painting this vision of the promised land and communicating it in such a convincing way that people get behind. Again, Steve Jobs with his reality distortion field convinces people that this can happen, and we're behind this. We don't know what the future is going to be. Maybe we can make it what we want to a certain extent, or we know the kind of future, or we know the future, what we want the future to be like. What are some ideas for actually getting there? And appreciative inquiry gives you a format for doing that. The other thing that I want to mention, and this is really relevant as well to coaching, personal development, and leadership, is that there are two neural networks in the brain, which have been discovered or more discovered in recent years. Originally called the task positive network and the default mode network. More recently, Richard Boyatzis, who's a leading researcher in this area, has kind of given these more user-friendly names, analytic network and empathic network. So that's what I'll call them, analytic and empathic networks. When one of these networks is switched on, it suppresses the other, and vice versa. So you can't sort of run both at once, but you need both of them in order for successful change to happen. And they have different characteristics, right? Analytic network is task-focused, problem-solving, detailed, analytic, narrowed down, get things done. Bit stressful because there's usually deadlines involved. That's what most people are in traditional work mode.
Yep.
Most of the time. You've got
Sure.
this to-do list, you've got this list of tasks, you've got this plan you've got to carry out.
Mm.
There are downsides to this, though.
Yeah.
And one of the downsides is that you tend to see other people as either like resources to help you achieve your goals or obstacles to be got round or flattened.
Yeah.
Also, because of this kind of laser focus on your goal, it means that you're not very open to new ideas.
Okay.
And it's not a very creative way of thinking,
Right.
because again, you're kind of narrowed down and analytic, which is the opposite of what you need for creativity.
Yeah.
So if you've got ideas, if you've got best practice, if you've got a plan to implement, it's a great mode to be in.
Mm.
But it's not going to help you come up with new ideas. It's certainly not going to help you be open to other ideas, and it's not going to help you relate to your team members and work together with other people very well. So the other mode, the empathic mode, it's kind of dreamier, it's more open, it's more focused on relationships than tasks. It's where you can be creative, it's where you can listen to new ideas and make sense of them and take them on board and adapt them. So really, if a problem hits and you don't know what to do, because there's not like an established best practice that you can look up in the manual and just follow these steps, you need to be in the empathic mode first.
Right.
So that you can relate successfully to your other team members, you can listen to their ideas, you can come up with better ideas yourself, and so on. Later on, once you've decided what you're going to do, then you can go into the analytic mode and actually implement those steps.
Yeah.
But you need both.
Of course.
So appreciative inquiry is, especially the appreciative interview part of it, is a really good way to help individuals and teams get into that empathic mode for coming up with new ideas and also relating to each other better.
Yeah.
I can give you an example, if
Please,
you like, of
go
how that can work. Yeah. So about 10 years ago, I was hired to help the nursing staff in a women's prison in the UK come up with a new drug dispensing regime for their inmates. Now, I don't know what this is like in Australia, but in this particular women's prison, most of the women in the prison were on some kind of drug or other. They were either in there because they were like heroin addicts, or they had all kinds of antidepressants and complicated antipsychotic drug regimes to take every day. They were having like a cocktail of drugs, and dispensing these drugs each day was a really complicated process. You can't just give each one their prescription, because you're going to get some people who, like, they might take half of their prescription and hoard the rest to sell on to other inmates. There's security considerations and so on. So it took a really long time. It took the bulk of the prison day to do this. Right. And the prison guards and the nursing staff were like very much two separate professions. They didn't talk to each other that much. They weren't like mates, most of them. Their interactions were kind of transactional. They were all about, just talking to them about getting stuff done, not sort of finding out about each other and so on. Yeah. So we had a group of about, 20 people, something like that. Half of them were guards, half of them were nursing staff. Right. And the remit was, let's design a better drug dispensing regime. Yeah. So the prison guards thought that the entire prison routine was bent out of shape around having to get this drug dispensing done, and they kind of resented that. The nursing staff thought that getting the drugs dispensed was bent out of shape around the routine of the prison day, and they resented that. Yeah. So they didn't even like each other very much, these two groups. So just as a warm-up, I got them into pairs, one prison guard, one nursing staff. And the question I got them to interview each other about was, what's been your best experience while you've been working here in the prison? Okay. And as soon as they started asking each other this, you could feel the atmosphere in the room change. And when we heard some of the stories at the end, some of the hardened quite hard and tough prison guards. They were getting quite emotional about how they, they helped this woman get off heroin, or after one of the inmates was released, they were able to help her get her kids back and be reunited with her family.
Great.
And so on. And they started to open up to each other because people like being interviewed and asked about their best experiences, what they're proud of, their achievements, things they love, and so on. Yeah. If you imagine, if you were to interview me about all my failures and shortcomings and like times when I've really fallen short and so on, that's going to be a very sticky interview.
Yeah.
It's certainly for me as the interviewee, but even for you as the interviewer, it's going to be like really trying to get blood out of a stone.
Sure.
I'm going to be giving as short answers as possible. I'm not going to want to look stupid. I'm not going to want to implicate my colleagues rather. Yeah. So it's going to be really hard to get any useful information out of me. If you ask me about, successes and things I'm proud of and achievements and so on, it's going to be hard to shut me up.
Yeah.
And that's going to also be hard work or easy work for you as the interviewer as well.
Yeah.
So the mood changed on both sides of the room. And after that, they were able to, they shifted more into this empathic mode.
Yeah.
And it was much, much easier for them to come up with creative ideas.
Great.
And work together to actually get some sort of plan put together.
Fantastic. And so what was the outcome of that process? Were you able to develop a system that was more effective?
Well, I was only there for that session. I certainly wasn't involved in the later planning, but yeah, there were hopeful signs that and when I followed it up later, yeah, they got something in place that was better. And quite often when you run these sessions, it's very encouraging in the kind of final stages of it to hear people saying, yeah, actually, we've come up with 3 ideas that will actually save us money and we can implement them right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can certainly get to like a high level plan or a set of ideas that people can choose from. Yeah. The detailed planning is probably done better by a smaller group later, unless it's just a team issue that the whole team can get involved in.
Yeah, so I can see that this appreciative inquiry process really could be used to help dysfunctional teams or teams that are resistant to working together. If you can, like you say, get people into their empathic network or get them saying me too, I understand what you're talking about because that's my experience too. People really open up in their creativity and their willingness to work together constructively and productively. So that's some great advice there for leaders and especially leading teams in difficult times. Andy, if people want to learn more about what you do and perhaps the whole process of appreciative inquiry in the context of leadership, where would you direct somebody if they want to sort of go in that direction?
Okay, so I have a website called coachingleaders.co.uk.
Okay.
Which I'll send you the link for.
Yes.
I write quite often on the blog on there. I've started doing some videos about appreciative inquiry. Occasionally we do webinars and stuff as well. So coachingleaders.co.uk will be a perfectly decent place to start.
And we're going to put that link in the description as well. Now, you've written a couple of books, and I know that you still do some NLP facilitating as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about your books in NLP and your facilitating there?
Yeah. So it's with NLP, it's actually not so much facilitating because NLP is usually more about training. So it's giving people skills that they can then use to make their own lives better or to work with others. So yeah, I've used NLP. I mean, it's 10 years since I last ran an NLP practitioner training.
Sure.
And the market for NLP practitioner training over the last 10 years has got kind of like the courses seem to be getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Right. Obviously, COVID's been a challenge as well. So some quite good reputable trainers now are putting NLP courses online, but interactive. So it can be done. I still think it's not going to be as good as actually getting people together in the classroom, but it can be done. I'm not doing that now.
Okay, sure.
What I do, or what I have been doing, is taking aspects of NLP and using them as like a toolkit to help people develop their emotional intelligence or their leadership skills. Because if you read Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, about a quarter of the way in, he says something like, fortunately, unlike IQ, EQ, emotional intelligence, can be developed and enhanced. Yes. Yeah. And when I read that 20 years ago, I thought, brilliant. I really want to find out, how to do this. And I really can't wait to get to this bit of the book. Yeah. And you get further and further and further through the book, and there's like this much left. And he's still not said anything about the practicalities of developing that.
Right.
So that was a bit of a disappointment. But fortunately, I realized that NLP gives you a tremendous toolkit for developing the different areas of emotional intelligence. Hasn't got quite as much to say about self-awareness, although there are NLP processes for developing that, but certainly got a huge amount on self-management and picking up signals from other people and, managing emotions in others. So that's what I've kind of been teaching at a corporate level. And I've written a series of ebooks, Practical NLP series, which pretty much covers the whole NLP practitioner syllabus. So that can be a useful review for anyone doing an NLP practitioner course. I've also done a tiny little booklet, which is about 16 pages long, which is 55 ways to develop your emotional intelligence, which is little implementable things, mostly drawn from NLP, that you can try out for yourself. Okay. So that's all up there. And if anyone looks, that's it's on the website, but if you go to Amazon and put Practical NLP Smith in there, you will get books by me coming up.
Okay, great. And look, if you've been listening to my show for any length of time, you know that I am a big proponent of emotional intelligence and encourage leaders to develop themselves in that area, because when you start to see people as your greatest resource rather than your assets or your revenue, you can only start winning as a leader. So I encourage you, go and have a look at Andy's work there if you're looking to develop in emotional intelligence. Andy, we're almost at the end of our time today. Is there anything else any last thoughts you'd like to leave with our listeners before we wrap up this conversation?
Okay. So I want to say something about solving problems in your life or in your work as a leader. So appreciative inquiry is not a panacea. Right. It's not something you should blanket use for anything. Sometimes it's going to be useful to look at a problem as a problem and think, okay, how can I solve this problem? This is true for like simple problems. Okay. Yes. If my light goes out, I'm not going to do an appreciative inquiry into when was the light better. I'm going to change the light bulb. Yeah. Okay. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to get an electrician in to trace the circuit and mend the break. Yeah. So for simple problems, conventional problem solving works really well. For complex problems, where maybe you've tried several things and they've not worked, or the fix that you've put in has had a horrible knock-on effect somewhere else that made things actually worse, or where people just don't know what to do, appreciative inquiry is a good bet for that.
Great.
That's the first thing. But I will say it's useful to take on an appreciative worldview as a way of looking at the world. So look for the good in things, look for the beauty in things, because you will find them. And if you do want to solve some intractable problem, start framing it not as why did this happen, but how can we have the opposite of it? Because that will start you looking in different directions. Yes. All we're doing is redressing the balance. Because we have a natural tendency to focus on negatives. Yes. I mean, that's a survival characteristic, obviously. You can see how kind of evolution has built that into us. But it does mean that we neglect the positives, which is where a lot of solutions are going to be found. So something like appreciative inquiry is just redressing the balance.
Yeah, and that's great.
And getting,
Great advice for leaders, remembering that this is one more tool for your toolkit. Not every problem is a nail, and not every solution is a hammer. So, appreciate your time today, Andy, and thank you for sharing with us on appreciative inquiry. I've learnt today. I would say that it is a topic that I'm new to, but much of what you have said resonates with how I like to encourage people to lead. So I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom today. We are going to get Andy's links up in the description, so make sure you check it out. Andy Smith, thank you so much. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you got a ton of value out of that episode. Don't forget to let us know what you thought in the comments, and if you have a topic you'd like us to cover next time, we'd love to hear from you. If you know anyone that would benefit from the content that we produce, please like and share this channel, and we look forward to having you next time on the Tarun Stevenson Leadership Channel.